Hey, my name is Owen Reed. I'm 32 years old. I restore old furniture for a living in a rented shop on the edge of Asheville, North Carolina. And the night everything in my life changed, I was standing in a dining room that cost more than my entire building, wearing a borrowed jacket, holding the hand of a woman I had known for 11 days, lying to her family with a straight face. The table was long and dark and polished so well I could see the chandelier reflected in it. There were 17 people around it. Her father sat at the head, a heavy man with white hair and a voice that didn't need to be loud to make a room go quiet. He had been watching me for the better part of an hour, not with anger, not with suspicion, but with something worse: recognition. And when the plates were being cleared and the room had gone soft with wine and small talk, he set down his glass, looked straight at me, and said 7 words that stopped my heart in my chest. "I know who you really are, son." Nora's hand went cold in mine. Somewhere behind me, a fork touched a plate, and the sound was enormous. I remember thinking very clearly that this was the moment I lost everything I had spent 11 days pretending I had. But let me take you back to where this actually started, because if I don't, you'll think I was just a man who agreed to lie for money, and that isn't what happened at all. 11 days earlier, I was delivering a walnut table to a gallery on Bishop Street. I build and repair furniture, mostly old pieces, mostly things other people have given up on. My father taught me. He used to say wood remembers everything that was ever done to it, every drought, every nail, every time somebody set a hot cup down without thinking, and that a good restorer doesn't erase any of it. He just makes it possible for the piece to keep going. He's been dead 9 years. I still hear him say that every time I put my hand flat on a board. That afternoon, I was carrying in the last leaf of the table when I heard a man's voice cut through the gallery like a saw hitting a nail. It wasn't shouting. That's the thing people get wrong about cruelty. The worst of it is almost never loud. "You're embarrassing yourself, Nora," the voice said. "Look at you. You smell like a bakery." I set the table leaf down and looked. She was standing near the wine table in a plain green dress, and she did have flour on her forearm, a pale streak of it near her elbow, the kind you get when you've been working since 4 in the morning. She was maybe 29, dark hair pinned up in a hurry, and she was holding a glass of water like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The man in front of her wore a gray suit that fit him the way money fits people who have never once worried about it. He had one hand in his pocket. He was smiling. That was what got me. He was smiling while he did it. "You had a chance to be part of something," he was saying. "Still quiet, still pleasant. Instead, you sell muffins out of your dead mother's kitchen. Do you know how that looks to people? Do you know how it looks to your father?" The gallery had gone half silent in that awful polite way, where everyone hears and nobody turns. She said, "Marcus, please," and he laughed and said, "Please what? Please stop telling the truth? I want to tell you I thought about it. I didn't." I walked over with sawdust still on my sleeves, and I put myself between them, not touching him, just standing there. "Ma'am," I said to her, "the table's in. Would you come tell me if the height's right? I don't want to leave it wrong." She stared at me. She had no idea who I was. I watched her understand what I was doing, and I watched her decide, in about half a second, to take it. "Of course," she said. "Marcus looked me up and down the way you'd look at a delivery you didn't order. This doesn't concern you." "No," I agreed, "it doesn't. That's why I'm walking away, and she's walking away with me." He said something else, something about people knowing their place, but we were already moving. Out on the sidewalk, she let go of the breath she'd been holding for what looked like 10 minutes. Her hands were shaking so hard the water sloshed out of the glass she'd forgotten she was still carrying. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know. Most people don't. I know that too." She laughed, one short, broken sound, and then she looked at the flower on her arm and rubbed at it and stopped when she realized I'd seen her do it. "It's from work," she said. "Yeah," I said. "It's a good thing to have on you." She looked up at me then, really looked, and her eyes were the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. "I'm Nora," she said. "Owen." That was all. She went back inside after a few minutes because her coat was in there and she refused to let him keep even that from her. and I finished the delivery and drove home and thought about her maybe 4 times that night, which for me was a lot. I lived alone above the shop. I had lived alone for a long time. After my father died the way he died, with his name still ruined and a stack of unopened letters on his kitchen counter, I got very good at a quiet life. I worked, I ate standing up, I fixed other people's broken things because there's a certain peace in a job where the ending is always better than the beginning. I didn't expect to see her again. 3 days later, she was standing in my shop doorway at 7 in the evening with rain in her hair, holding a cardboard box, and I knew before she said a word that something in her had run out. I brought bread, she said. It's a bribe. I want to be honest about that up front. I wiped my hands on a rag. Okay. Can I sit down? I moved a clamp off the stool. She sat. She set the box on the bench and didn't open it. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain on the metal roof and the little tick of the space heater. Then she said, I need to hire someone to pretend to be my husband for one dinner. I didn't laugh. I want you to understand that, because she was braced for it. Her shoulders were up around her ears, waiting for me to laugh. I just said, tell me why, and she did. Her mother had died 4 years ago. Her mother had left her a house on Bell Creek Road, a 2-story place with a stone chimney and a kitchen big enough to work in, and Nora had turned that kitchen into a small bakery that supplied 3 restaurants and a coffee shop and paid her almost enough to live on. But the house hadn't come to her clean. Her mother had put it in a trust because her mother had been sick and frightened and badly advised in the last year of her life, and the trust said Nora took full ownership on her 30th birthday, provided the trustee found her, and these were the actual words, settled and of stable circumstance. Her 30th birthday was in 19 days, and the trustee was Marcus Hale. He was my fiancé, she said, looking at her hands. For 2 years. My father's business partner's son. Our families have been tangled up together since before I was born. When my mother got sick, his firm handled everything, and Marcus was so helpful, and I was so tired, and I signed things I shouldn't have signed. And when you ended it, he told me I'd regret it, she swallowed. 2 weeks ago, he filed a petition. He wants the court to declare that I'm not stable enough to hold the property. He's got a whole story ready: erratic employment, no fixed income, living alone in a house too large for her means, unmarried, isolated from family. He wants the trust dissolved and the house sold, and he's already got a buyer because the land backs onto a development his father's company is putting up. He wants your mother's house. He wants me to lose it, she said. The house is just what's available. The rain got louder for a second and then eased. There's a hearing, she said, 8 days after my birthday. But before that, there's my father's 60th birthday dinner. And every person who could possibly say anything about my character in that courtroom will be in that room. His lawyers, my father's lawyers, the cousins, the family friends. If I walk in there alone, with flour on my sleeves, and Marcus tells everyone at that table that I'm falling apart, that's the story. That's what they'll all remember when they're asked. She finally looked up. But if I walk in with a husband, if there's a man standing next to me who looks like a life, it changes what they see. And you want that man to be me. I want it to be someone Marcus can't buy, she said. You're the only person I've met in 6 years who told him no in public. I stood there for a while. I looked at my shop, at the half-finished dresser I'd been fighting with for a month, at the photograph of my father tacked to the post by the light switch. How much of it would be a lie? I asked. She frowned. What? If we're going to do this, I want to know exactly which parts we're lying about, because I've watched what lies do to people. My father lost his name to one. So tell me, are we saying we're married? Married in March, she said quietly. Small, courthouse, no fuss. That part's easy. Nobody in my family would have expected an invitation. And the rest? The rest, she said. I'd rather not have to make up. She was watching my face. That's why it's you. Everything else about you I can just tell them and it'll be true. I looked at the box of bread on the bench. You would have been fine without me, I said. No, she said. I wouldn't, and I'm too tired to pretend otherwise. That's what did it. not the money she'd been about to offer, which she never got to say out loud, because I told her to keep it before she could. It was the sound of a woman with flour on her arm admitting she couldn't carry it by herself to a stranger in a cold workshop in the rain. Okay, I said. She blinked. Okay? One dinner, she let out a breath and put both hands flat on the workbench like the room had tilted. And then she said something I wasn't ready for. You should probably know one more thing before you say yes. Go on. My father's name is Gerald Whitfield. I didn't move. I hope I didn't move. Whitfield Construction had been the biggest name in this county for 30 years. Whitfield Construction had been the company my father worked for. Whitfield Construction was the reason my father died with an unopened stack of letters on his counter. That's fine, I heard myself say. She was already gathering her coat, already relieved, already talking about what to wear and what her cousins would ask. She didn't see my hands. I stood in that shop for a long time after she left. I could have called her that night. I could have called her the next morning. I didn't, and I've thought about why 100 times since, and the honest answer is that some part of me wanted to sit at that man's table. Not to hurt him, I don't think I ever wanted that. I wanted to see his face. We had 8 days. She came to the shop most evenings after her deliveries, and we did the thing you have to do, which is build a history out of true pieces. Where we met, what I do, that she gets up at 4 and is useless after 9 at night, that her mother's name was Ellen and she made a pear tart every October and never once wrote the recipe down, so Nora spent 2 years getting it back by taste alone, that my mother left when I was 6 and my father raised me in a shop that smelled like linseed oil. On the fourth evening, she asked about him. I was sanding, and I kept sanding while I answered. He was a Finnish carpenter, I said. Best I ever saw. Stairs, mostly. Handrails. The kind of work nobody looks at and everybody touches. Was? There was a job when I was 17. A stairwell in an office building went down during construction. 3 men were hurt. One of them never walked right again. The sandpaper made its small sound. The company said my dad's framing was out of spec. There were signed inspection sheets with his name on them. He said he never signed them. Nobody believed him. He lost his license, we lost the shop, and he spent 9 years writing letters to people who didn't answer. She was very quiet. Owen. He died in the spring, I said. Heart. He was 61. He'd stopped opening the mail by then. I finally stopped sanding and looked at her, and she looked back. And I want to be clear that I could have told her right then. The sentence was sitting fully formed in my mouth. It was your father's company. Instead, I said, anyway, that's why I don't like men who smile while they take things. She reached across the bench and put her hand over mine. Neither of us said anything. We just stayed like that, her hand on my hand, the heater ticking, both of us pretending it was nothing. On the sixth evening, she brought a pear tart, and she stood there while I ate it and watched my face like the answer mattered. And when I told her it was the best thing I'd ever put in my mouth, she turned around and busied herself with nothing for a full minute so I wouldn't see her cry. On the seventh evening, she taught me the names: Aunt Delia, who would ask about children; Cousin Whit, who would ask what I drove; her father, who would not ask me anything, because that was how he tested people. He'll just wait, she said. He'll wait to see if you fill the silence. I'm good at silence, I said. I know, she said. It's the most restful thing about you. And on the eighth day, she handed me a plain gold band that had belonged to her grandfather. It slid on like it had been waiting. She looked at it, then at me, and something moved across her face too fast to name. And she said, "It's just a prop." And I said, "Sure." And we both looked away. The house was up on Fairfield Ridge, all brick and glass and lit windows, and there were 9 cars in the drive when we got there. In the car, she gripped the wheel and said, "Last chance." "Drive," I said. She parked. Inside, everything smelled like lilies and roast lamb, and I understood within about 90 seconds that Nora had been raised in that house the way you raise a plant in a pot that's slightly too small. People greeted her carefully, warmly even, but carefully, the way you'd greet someone who had been ill. Aunt Delia held both her hands and said, "You look thin, sweetheart." And Nora smiled and said, "Thank you." And then Marcus Hale walked out of the study with a drink in his hand and stopped dead when he saw me. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. He put it away fast, I'll give him that. Nora, he said, you brought a friend. My husband, she said. It landed on the room like a plate dropping. Somebody actually said, oh. Dahlia's mouth opened, and Marcus laughed, warm and delighted, and put out his hand and said, well, congratulations. You'll have to tell us everything. His grip was hard, mine was harder, because I've been clamping wood shut for 20 years, and I watched his eyes flicker when he realized it. Owen, I said. Owen, he repeated, tasting it. And what do you do, Owen? I fix furniture. He restores it, Nora said. There's a difference. Is there? Marcus said. Nora's hand found mine under the tablecloth somewhere around the soup and stayed there. I answered what I was asked and no more. I said we'd married in March at the courthouse. I said her bread was better than anything I'd eaten in my life, which got a laugh from the far end of the table, and which was the only sentence I said all night that took no effort at all. Marcus worked the room. Twice he tried to steer the conversation toward the trust, and twice Nora's father cut across him so smoothly that Marcus couldn't do anything but smile and let it go. And through all of it, Gerald Whitfield watched me. His hair had gone completely white since I'd last seen him at a distance, but the eyes were the same. He didn't ask me a single question. He just watched, the way you watch a joint to see if it's going to hold. It came apart over dessert. Marcus stood, glass in hand, and said he wanted to say something to the family, and the room quieted, and he turned to Nora with a look of such perfect, gentle concern that I felt my back teeth come together. I think we all know, he said, that the last few years had been hard on Nora, losing Ellen, the house, trying to run a business out of a kitchen. He shook his head, sad, kind. As trustee, I have a responsibility, and it isn't a pleasant one. There's a hearing in 2 weeks. I'd hoped we could avoid it. And now there's a marriage nobody knew about to a man nobody's met, 3 weeks before her birthday. He looked around the table, letting it sit. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just saying that when I stand in front of a judge, I have to describe what I see, and what I see concerns me. Nora's hand went rigid in mine. He'd done it beautifully. Every person at that table was now doing the arithmetic he'd handed them. Delia was looking at my jacket. Cousin Whit was looking at the ring. And that was when Gerald Whitfield set down his glass and looked at me and said, I know who you really are, son. The room went absolutely still. I felt Neela turn to look at me, and I couldn't look back at her. I thought about my father's kitchen counter and the letters and the way he'd stopped opening them. You're Ray Reed's boy, Gerald said. Marcus frowned. Nobody at that table knew the name except the man saying it and me. Yes, sir, I said. I've been sitting here 3 hours trying to be wrong, he said. You've got his hands. He looked at his own for a second. You've got his way of not filling up a quiet. And then, in front of 17 people in his own dining room on his 60th birthday, Gerald Whitfield said, Your father didn't sign those inspection sheets. Somebody's chair scraped. Marcus said, Gerald, in a voice with a warning in it, and it was the first honest sound I'd heard out of him all night. Gerald didn't even look at him. I've known for 15 years, he said to me. I want to say it out loud in front of my family because I have never once said it out loud, and I'm 60 years old, and my wife has been dead 4 years, and I am done being a coward at my own table. Dad, Nora said. Ellen begged me to fix it, he said. For years she begged me, and I said I'd handle it, and I never did, because handling it meant admitting that the sheets were signed by a 24-year-old kid in my partner's office who was told to keep the schedule moving. Now he looked at Marcus, and Marcus's face did something I'll remember for the rest of my life. It went blank. Not angry, not guilty, blank. The way a screen goes when the power is cut. That's a hell of an accusation, he said. It's not an accusation, Gerald said. It's a memory. Your father brought me the sheets. He told me they'd been handled. And when I asked him by who, he said, my boy took care of it, like he was proud. He picked his glass back up and didn't drink from it. I chose the company. I chose the schedule. I chose your father's friendship over a man who built my staircase. He nodded toward the hall, and I turned, and I saw it, the curved walnut rail sweeping up into the dark, and I knew that shape the way you know a signature, because I'd watched him laminate it on sawhorses in our shop when I was 15. That man came to my office twice, Gerald said. I had him told I was out. I couldn't speak. I want to describe what happened in my chest, and I don't have the words for it. It wasn't relief. It wasn't joy. It was more like the feeling of setting down something so heavy you'd forgotten it was in your arms, and then the terrible ache when the blood comes back. Marcus stood up. This is a lovely piece of theater, he said, but it changes nothing about a hearing in 2 weeks, and frankly, it explains a great deal. She didn't marry a man, she recruited one. He turned to me. How much is she paying you? And I heard my own voice, very level, come out into that room. She offered, I said. I told her to keep it. Of course you did. Mr. Hale, I said. The difference between us is that I don't need this family for anything. I stood too. But you're right about one thing. She didn't marry me. Nora made a small sound. I looked down at her white face, and I made the only decision I've never once second-guessed. We're not married, I said. There's no license. I met her 11 days ago in a gallery while your man there was telling her she smelled like a bakery. She asked me to stand next to her for one night so 17 people would see a woman with a life instead of a woman on her own. I said yes because I've watched what happens to somebody when a room decides what they are before they open their mouth. Delia had her hand over her mouth. So there's your testimony, I said to Marcus. Take it to the judge. Tell him the truth. Tell him she was so frightened of you that she borrowed a stranger for a dinner. I put the ring down on the tablecloth next to my glass. It made a small, clear sound. And then tell him why. Nobody moved. Then Nora stood up beside me, and she was shaking, and her voice came out steady anyway. He's telling the truth, she said, all of it. And I'd do it again. She turned to her father. Every year I sat at this table and let people talk about me like I wasn't in the room. This is the first time anyone said anything true at it. We left. She drove 3 miles and pulled into the gravel lot of a closed farm stand and put her head against the steering wheel. I'm so sorry, she said. I'm so sorry. I dragged you into a room with the man who... Nora, I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know your father worked for. I did, I said. She lifted her head. I knew the night you told me his name, I said. I should have told you then. I didn't, because I wanted to sit at that table. That's the ugly truth, and you're allowed to be angry about it. She looked at me for a long moment in the dark, and then she said, Was any of it true? Which part? Any of it. I thought about the pear tart and the flower on her arm and her hand over mine on the workbench. The part where I ate your food and thought I'd never want to eat anyone else's, I said. That part was true. She started crying then, the ugly, exhausted kind. And I didn't tell her to stop, and I didn't touch her until she reached over first. Here is what I've learned about the truth, and if you've ever had one you are carrying around unopened, you'll know exactly what I mean. It doesn't fix anything by itself. It just stops you from having to hold the lid down. The next 11 days were the hardest. Marcus amended his petition to include the dinner and submitted a statement describing a fraudulent marriage claim intended to deceive the trustee. 2 of the restaurants Nora supplied got calls from someone concerned about food handling at an unlicensed residential kitchen, and one of them dropped her. She sat on my shop floor with her back against the dresser and said, I'm going to lose it, and I said maybe, because she'd had enough people lie to her. But not tonight. What Marcus didn't count on was Gerald Whitfield. He came to the shop on a Tuesday morning and stood in the doorway looking at the tools on the wall like a man in a church he'd been thrown out of. Some of these are his, he said, the Stanley planes. He picked one up and set it down like it might burn him. I brought you something, he said, and he put a document box on my bench. The original site file, not the copy that went to the board. I've had it in my house for 15 years. He didn't look at me. The inspection sheets in there are dated the 11th. Ray was in Charlotte on the 11th, at his sister's, because she'd had surgery. And I know that because he called my office from her landline and my secretary wrote the number down. That slip is in there too. My hands weren't steady when I opened it. Why now? I asked. Because my daughter stood up at my table, he said, and I have spent 4 years being furious that she wouldn't come home and about 11 days understanding that she couldn't. He finally looked at me. I'd like to give this to her lawyer as well. There's a great deal in there about how Hale and Associates handles paperwork when a schedule slips. A judge who's about to hear Marcus Hale describe someone else's stability might find it interesting. I said, Mr. Whitfield, Gerald, this will cost you. Yes, he said. It should have cost me 15 years ago. The hearing was on a Thursday in a courtroom on the second floor with a radiator that clanked. Nora wore her mother's gray coat. I sat behind her in the second row because I had no standing in that room and no business in it, and I have never in my life wanted so badly to be somewhere I wasn't allowed. Marcus's attorney went first, and he was good. He talked about erratic income, an unlicensed kitchen in a residential structure, and a marriage announced to 17 witnesses and admitted within the hour to be a fiction. He used the word unstable 6 times. Then Nora's attorney called Gerald Whitfield, and Gerald sat in that chair and said that he was the settler's husband, that he had been present at the dinner in question, that his daughter had brought a man to stand beside her because she was, in his words, outnumbered in a room full of people who had known her since she was born, and that he considered that not evidence of instability, but evidence of somebody being cornered. And then he said he had concerns about the trustee. He laid out the file, not my father's story. That wasn't the point of that hearing, but the pattern in it. Documents signed by people who weren't present, dates that didn't survive a phone log, a firm's habit, going back 2 decades, of making paperwork say whatever the schedule needed it to say. And then Nora's attorney asked Marcus, under oath, whether he had personally directed anyone to sign an inspection document on behalf of an absent contractor. I watched the back of Marcus Hale's head. I watched him look at his attorney. I watched him take 4 full seconds to answer a yes or no question. He said, "Not to my recollection." Nora's attorney said, "Your Honor, I'd like to enter the phone log." Then it was Nora's turn. She stood up in her mother's coat and she didn't cry. She told the judge what she baked and who she baked it for and how much a month it made. And it wasn't much, and she said the number out loud anyway. She said she'd applied for the commercial kitchen certification in January and had the receipt. And then she said, "I'm told I'm not stable." I'd like to say what I think stable means. My mother died in the room above that kitchen. Every morning for 4 years, I have gotten up in the dark and gone down the stairs she died at the top of and made bread. I didn't miss a day, not the first week, not her birthday. She stopped and took a breath. I don't know a steadier thing than that. The judge took 20 minutes. He came back and said the standard in the trust document was vague to the point of being unenforceable, that he found no evidence the beneficiary was unable to manage the property, that the arrangement at the dinner was, in his phrase, socially unwise and legally irrelevant, and that in light of the testimony he was removing Marcus Hale as trustee effective immediately and referring several documents to the state licensing board. The property passed to Nora clean. She had turned 39 days earlier. I hadn't known. She'd let it go by without telling anyone. Outside on the courthouse steps, she stood blinking in the light like someone coming out of a long illness. Gerald put his coat around her shoulders, and she let him, and I looked away, because that one wasn't mine to watch. Then she came down 2 steps to where I was standing. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know. Most people wouldn't have. I know that too." She laughed, and it broke, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "Owen," she said, "it's over. There's no dinner. There's nothing to pretend about anymore. I know. So," she looked at me, "so what are you still doing here?" I had thought about how to say it for 11 days and then 12 more, and standing there, I couldn't remember a single word of it. So I said the only thing I had. "I'd like to eat your food for a long time," I said. "That's it. That's the whole thing. I'd like to sit in your kitchen at 4 in the morning and hand you things and not talk, and I'd like to fix that staircase because the third tread is loose and it's been driving me insane since the first time I walked up it. She was crying and laughing at once. That's your speech? I fix furniture, I said. I never claimed to be good at this part. She grabbed the front of my jacket with both hands and kissed me on the courthouse steps in front of her father, her attorney, and a man from the licensing board who was still trying to find his car. We didn't rush after that, and I'm glad. We had a strange history to unmake, and we did it slowly, in daylight. I moved my tools into the barn behind the Bell Creek house that spring. She got her certification in May and hung the paper by the door in a frame I made, and the joints were terrible because my hands were shaking when I cut them. Her father came for supper on Sundays. It took him about 4 months to stop being careful in that house. He and I never talked about the file again. We talked about wood. It turned out he'd wanted to be a carpenter before his own father put him in an office, and one Sunday in October I put a chisel in his hand and showed him how to pare a hinge mortise, and he was terrible at it, and he laughed like a man who hadn't in a long time. Marcus lost his license in the fall. I heard he moved to Charlotte. I don't think about him much. In November, the state board sent a letter to the last known address of Raymond Reed, and it came to me and it said that the finding of 2009 had been reviewed and vacated. 6 lines. That's what 9 years of unopened mail was worth in the end. 6 lines and a signature stamp. I sat on the back steps with it for an hour. Nora came out and sat next to me and didn't say anything, and after a while she put her head on my shoulder, and that was better than the letter. I hung it in the shop next to his photograph. Anybody who comes in asks what it is, and I say, my father built stairs, and they nod like that explains it, and honestly, it does. We got married the following June in the yard. 31 people, most of them her family, and 4 of them mine, which is to say 3 cousins and my father's old apprentice who drove up from Georgia and cried through the whole thing. I wore the same jacket from that dinner, which she thought was hysterical and I thought was the point. Her father walked her out from the kitchen door, past the ovens, and when he handed her over, he held onto my hand a second longer than he needed to and said, "Thank you for sitting at my table." And I said, "Thank you for saying it out loud." We didn't write vows. I told her I would never let a room decide what she was. She told me she'd feed me until I was old. Aunt Delia said it was the least romantic ceremony she had ever attended, and then wept openly through all of it. There's a pear tart every October now. She still doesn't write it down. She says her mother didn't, and she isn't going to be the one who ruins that. And I think what she means is that some things are supposed to live in a person's hands instead of on paper. Our daughter is 2. She has flour on her arms most days because she stands on a stool by the bench and pats a lump of dough into shapes and takes her job extremely seriously. Her name is Ellen. She calls the staircase Papa's Stairs, and she doesn't yet know which Papa, and someday I'll tell her. Last week I was refinishing that walnut handrail. I'd finally gotten permission, or maybe just enough nerve, to bring it back, and I had it upside down on sawhorses in the barn with the light coming in sideways, and I found something I'd never seen in 15 years of knowing that piece existed. Underneath, on the blind face, where it would sit against the wall for 100 years and nobody would ever look, my father had written in pencil, RR 2004, for somebody's good mornings. I put my hand flat on it the way he taught me. Then I went inside and stood in the doorway of a kitchen that smelled like bread at 5 in the morning, and my wife was at the bench with her hair pinned up in a hurry and a streak of flour on her elbow, and she looked over her shoulder and said, "You're up early." And I said, "I've got something to show you, because here's what I know now, and it's the only thing I've got. A man can spend 9 years writing letters nobody answers and still leave a sentence in pencil where no one will find it, just in case. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, somebody turns the thing over.